Grace Holloway stared at the email on her laptop screen, certain there had to be some mistake, because nobody hired an event planner for a single dinner party and offered to pay triple her usual rate unless something weird was going on. She read it again. The message was professional, direct, and came from an executive assistant named Margaret who worked for someone called Sebastian Brennan. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but Grace couldn't quite place it. He needed an intimate dinner party planned for 8 people in 2 weeks. The budget was essentially unlimited. The catch: he wanted her expertise exclusively for this one event, with a consultation that very afternoon if she was available. Grace glanced around her small studio apartment, where she ran her event planning business from a desk wedged between her kitchen counter and her second-hand couch. She had started Holloway Events 3 years ago after working her way up through various catering companies and wedding planning firms. The business was finally starting to gain traction, but she was still very much in the scrappy startup phase. This kind of money could cover her rent for 3 months. She typed back a professional acceptance and spent the next hour getting ready, choosing a navy blue dress that looked expensive even though she had found it at a consignment shop. The address Margaret sent her was in the most exclusive neighborhood in the city, where historic brownstones stood shoulder to shoulder with modern architectural marvels. The house turned out to be one of the latter, a stunning 4-story structure of glass and steel that somehow managed to look warm rather than cold. Grace pressed the intercom button, and a woman's crisp voice invited her inside. Margaret met her in the foyer, a woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled back in an elegant twist. She smiled warmly and shook Grace's hand. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. Sebastian is finishing a call, but he will be right with you. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Tea?" "Water would be great, thank you." Margaret led her through the house, and Grace tried not to gawk. The interior was a careful balance of modern design and comfort, with warm wood floors, contemporary art on the walls, and furniture that looked both stylish and actually livable. They passed a kitchen that made Grace's event planner heart skip a beat, all marble countertops and professional-grade appliances. They settled in a sitting room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a private garden. Margaret disappeared to get water, and Grace pulled out her tablet, ready to take notes. She heard footsteps and looked up, expecting to see Margaret. Instead, a man walked in, and Grace suddenly understood why the name Sebastian Brennan had sounded familiar. He was the CEO of Brennan Industries, a manufacturing company that had somehow thrived while others struggled, known for treating its workers well and still turning massive profits. She had seen him in business magazines and news articles. In photos, he looked handsome in a distant, corporate way. In person, he was something else entirely. Sebastian Brennan was probably in his early 30s, with dark hair that looked like he had been running his fingers through it, sharp features, and intense gray eyes. He wore dress pants and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, which somehow made him look more intimidating rather than less. He was tall, probably over 6 feet, with the build of someone who actually used the expensive gym equipment Grace was sure this house contained. "Miss Holloway," he said, his voice deep and controlled. He crossed the room and extended his hand. "Thank you for coming." Grace stood and shook his hand, trying to project confidence. His grip was firm and warm. "Of course. I am happy to help with your dinner party." Something flickered across his face, an expression she could not quite read. He gestured for her to sit and took the chair across from her. Margaret appeared with water for both of them and then quietly excused herself. Sebastian leaned back in his chair, studying Grace in a way that made her want to fidget. She held his gaze and waited for him to speak. "I am going to be honest with you," he finally said. I do need a dinner party planned. That part is real. But I also have an ulterior motive for bringing you here. Grace's stomach tightened. Here it comes, she thought. The weird request. The uncomfortable proposition. She had been in this business long enough to develop good instincts about people, though, and something told her Sebastian Brennan was not that type. Still, she kept her expression neutral. I am listening. My executive assistant, Margaret, is the most efficient person I have ever met. She runs my professional life with precision, but she is planning to retire in 6 months, and before she does, she has decided her final project is fixing my personal life. He said this without humor, stating it like a fact. She thinks I work too much. She is probably right. She has been leaving printouts of studies about work-life balance on my desk and casually mentioning things like hobbies and social engagements. Despite her wariness, Grace felt a smile tugging at her lips. That sounds like a caring assistant. It is terrifying, Sebastian said, but Grace caught the hint of affection in his voice. Last week, she somehow signed me up for a cooking class. I don't know how she even forged my signature on the registration form. Grace did smile then. So where do I fit into this? Sebastian leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, suddenly more engaged. The dinner party is real. I have been putting off a social obligation to my board members and their spouses. But when I was complaining to Margaret about not having time to plan it properly, she suggested hiring an event planner. Then she found your website, read every testimonial, watched every video you have posted, and became convinced you are exactly what I need. For dinner party planning, Grace said carefully. For life planning, Sebastian corrected. She thinks if I hire you for one event and you are as good as your reputation suggests, I might be convinced to hire you for more. To help me create some kind of social calendar that does not make me want to fake my own death. Grace blinked. That is not really what event planners do. I know, which is why I am being upfront about this. I will pay you exceptionally well for the dinner party regardless. But if you are willing to take on a more unusual project, I will pay you a consultant rate to help me figure out how to have a personal life that does not feel like another job I am failing at. He said that last part with such matter-of-fact resignation that Grace felt something twist in her chest. She studied him, this millionaire CEO, in his beautiful house and saw the genuine exhaustion in his eyes. Why do you think you would be bad at it? She asked. Sebastian looked surprised by the question. At what? At having a personal life. You said you feel like you are failing at it. Why? He was quiet for a moment, and Grace worried she had overstepped. Then he said, because I approach everything like a business problem. I optimize and strategize and measure ROI. That works for running a company. It does not work for relationships or relaxation or any of the things normal people seem to do without thinking. Grace made a decision that was probably stupid but felt right. Okay, I will plan your dinner party, and I will take on your unusual project, but I have conditions. Sebastian's eyebrows rose. Go on. First, you have to actually follow through. I am not going to spend time creating plans for you to ignore. Second, you have to be honest with me about what you actually like, not what you think you should like. And third, you have to accept that some things cannot be optimized. Sometimes you just have to show up and see what happens. For the first time since they started talking, Sebastian smiled. It transformed his face completely, making him look younger and more approachable. I can agree to those terms. They spent the next 2 hours discussing the dinner party. Grace learned that Sebastian wanted something elegant but not stuffy, impressive but not ostentatious. He gave her the guest list, background on each couple, and their dietary restrictions without needing to look anything up. His memory for detail was remarkable. You really do approach everything like a business problem, Grace observed, scribbling notes on her tablet. Is that bad? For a dinner party? No, this is actually helpful. She looked up at him. But we are going to have to work on that for the personal life stuff. I am a project now, he asked, and she could not tell if he was annoyed or amused. You made yourself a project when you hired me, Grace countered. I am just taking the job seriously. That earned her another smile, smaller but genuine. By the time Grace left Sebastian's house, the sun was setting and her head was spinning with ideas. She had 2 weeks to pull off a flawless dinner party, and apparently she had also agreed to become some kind of life coach to a millionaire who forgot how to be a person. Her phone rang as she walked to the subway. It was her best friend Natalie, who ran a successful bakery downtown. So, Natalie demanded, how did the mysterious meeting go? I am not entirely sure, Grace admitted. I think I just got hired to plan a dinner party and also reorganize someone's entire existence. That is either the best thing that has ever happened to you or the start of a horror movie. Grace laughed. I am hoping for the former. Over the next few days, Grace threw herself into planning the dinner party. She researched the guests, found the perfect caterer, and designed a menu that would feel special without being pretentious. She sourced flowers, hired a small string quartet for background music, and worked with Sebastian's housekeeper to plan the table settings. Sebastian was surprisingly involved in the process, responding to her emails within hours and having opinions about everything from wine pairings to the proposed seating arrangement. They had 3 more meetings at his house, and each time, Grace learned a little more about him. He had built Brennan Industries from a failing company he inherited from his father, turning it profitable within 2 years through a combination of innovation and genuine care for the workers. He was respected in the business world, but had a reputation for being intensely private. He worked 12-hour days minimum and spent most weekends at the office. When was the last time you did something just for fun? Grace asked during their 3rd meeting. They were in his study, reviewing the final timeline for the dinner party. Sebastian thought about it for so long that Grace knew the answer was bad. I went to a basketball game last year, he finally said. Was it fun? It was networking. One of my clients had season tickets. Grace closed her tablet and looked at him directly. Okay, here is your first assignment. Before the dinner party, you are going to do one thing that is completely for yourself. Not for work, not for networking, just because you want to. That is not how assignments work. You are supposed to tell me what to do. No, because then you will approach it like a task to check off. You need to figure out what you actually want to do. Sebastian looked frustrated, running a hand through his hair in a gesture Grace was learning meant he was trying to solve a problem. I honestly don't know. Then start paying attention, Grace said gently. Notice what makes you curious or interested. Notice when you feel even a tiny bit of excitement. That's where you start. The dinner party was in 1 week when Grace got a text from Sebastian at 9 p.m. on a Wednesday. It was the first time he had texted her instead of emailing. There is a documentary about deep-sea exploration showing at the Science Museum tomorrow night. I walked past a poster for it, and I stopped to read the whole thing. Does that count? Grace grinned at her phone. Yes, did you buy a ticket? Not yet. Buy one, then go report back. The next evening, Grace was finishing up a consultation with a bride when her phone buzzed. Sebastian had sent a photo of the massive screen at the Science Museum's theater, currently showing bioluminescent jellyfish. This is incredible, his text read. I forgot how much I used to love documentaries. Grace felt a warm satisfaction that had nothing to do with professional success. See, you are capable of fun. His response came a few minutes later. You should be here. They showed how they built the submarine camera equipment. Very impressive engineering. Grace stared at that message longer than she should have, something fluttering in her chest. She typed and deleted 3 responses before settling on. Maybe next time. I will hold you to that. The dinner party arrived faster than Grace expected. She spent the entire day at Sebastian's house, overseeing every detail. The caterers arrived at 4 to begin preparations. The florist delivered the arrangements, pale pink and white peonies mixed with eucalyptus, exactly as Grace had envisioned. The string quartet set up in the corner of the dining room doing sound checks. Sebastian appeared around 5, looking stressed. I should be helping. Absolutely not, Grace said firmly. Your job is to shower, get dressed, and be ready to welcome your guests at 7. That is it. But no. Trust me. He studied her face, then nodded. Okay, I trust you. Those words should not have affected Grace the way they did, but she felt them settle somewhere deep in her chest. At 6:30, everything was perfect. The table looked elegant with its simple white linens and soft candlelight. The food was ready, timed to perfection. The music drifted through the house at just the right volume. Sebastian came downstairs at 6:45 wearing a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly. His hair was neat, his jaw cleanly shaved, and Grace momentarily forgot how to form words. How do I look? He asked, adjusting his cufflinks. Like a CEO, Grace managed. Professional, successful. He looked disappointed. Is that a problem? No, it is perfect for tonight. She wanted to tell him he looked handsome, that the suit made his gray eyes look almost silver, that she had trouble focusing on anything else when he entered the room. But that would be wildly inappropriate, so she adjusted one of the flower arrangements instead. The dinner party was a complete success. Sebastian's guests arrived, and he slipped into the role of gracious host with an ease that surprised Grace. She stayed in the background, managing the flow of the evening, ensuring each course appeared at the right moment, and handling a minor crisis when one of the violinist's strings broke. She watched Sebastian throughout the night, seeing him navigate conversations with skill, making everyone feel valued and heard. But she also noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way his smile became slightly fixed as the evening wore on. This was a performance for him, she realized. An obligation being executed perfectly but without real joy. The last guests left at 10:30, full of praise for the evening. Sebastian closed the door behind them and leaned against it, closing his eyes briefly. You okay? Grace asked. His eyes opened. That was exhausting, but successful. Because of you. He pushed off the door and walked toward her. Every detail was perfect, Grace. Thank you. The way he said her name made her stomach flip. She busied herself gathering her things. Just doing my job. About that. Sebastian grabbed 2 wine glasses and the remaining half bottle from dinner. Can you spare 30 minutes? I want to discuss the next phase. Grace knew she should say no. It was late, she was tired, and there was something in the air between them that felt dangerous. But she found herself nodding. They ended up in the sitting room where they had first met, shoes kicked off, wine in hand. The string quartet was gone, the caterers had cleaned everything, and the house was quiet. Margaret cornered me this morning, Sebastian said. She wanted to know if I was going to hire you for the extended project. I think she might actually cancel her retirement if I say no, Grace laughed. No pressure then. The thing is, I want to say yes. He turned to look at her. Tonight was work for me, another business obligation. But going to that documentary the other night, that was the first time in years I did something just because I wanted to. You gave me that. You gave that to yourself, Grace corrected. I just pointed out the poster. You knew I needed pointing. He swirled the wine in his glass. I am not good at this, at being a person instead of a CEO. I could use help, your help, if you are willing. Grace thought about her schedule, which was full but manageable. She thought about her rent, which was due in 2 weeks. She thought about Sebastian, this intense, driven man who had somehow forgotten how to live his own life. Mostly, she thought about the flutter in her chest when he smiled, and how that should probably be a reason to say no. What exactly would this look like? She asked. I am not sure. We would figure it out together. But I am thinking you help me build a calendar that is not just work. Social events, hobbies, experiences, things that normal 32-year-old men do. I will pay you a monthly retainer, same as I pay my other consultants. I am not a life coach. No, you are better. You understand how to create experiences that matter. That is what I need. Grace set down her wine glass. Okay, but same rules as before. You have to actually show up for the things we plan, and you have to be honest about what is working and what is not. Sebastian extended his hand. Deal. She shook it, and the touch lasted a moment too long. When she pulled away, her palm was tingling. They started small. Grace did research, lots of it, trying to figure out what Sebastian Brennan actually enjoyed. She learned he had studied engineering before switching to business. He liked problem-solving, documentaries, good coffee, and basketball, though he never actually played anymore. He was an only child. His parents had retired to Florida. He ran every morning at 6 a.m. without fail. Running counts as a hobby, Grace pointed out during their first official planning session. Running is exercise, Sebastian countered. It is maintenance. Do you enjoy it? He paused. Sometimes, when I am not thinking about work. How often is that? Almost never. Grace made a note on her ever-growing list. Okay, new rule. When you run, no phone, no podcasts about business, no planning your day, just run. Sebastian looked pained. That seems inefficient. That is the point. She started building him a calendar. 1 evening per week for a social activity. 1 weekend afternoon for a hobby or experience. Nothing work-related. Sebastian resisted at first, claiming he did not have time, until Grace pulled up his actual calendar and pointed out the 3-hour block he labeled as working dinner that was really just him eating takeout at his desk. You have time, she said. You are just using it badly. Their second planned activity was a cooking class, the same one Margaret had secretly registered him for. Grace decided to attend with him, telling herself it was to ensure he actually went and not because she wanted to see him try to make fresh pasta. The class was held in a cheerful kitchen studio downtown, full of amateur cooks and couples on date nights. Sebastian looked deeply uncomfortable when they arrived. Everyone here looks like they are having fun already, he muttered to Grace as they put on aprons. That is generally the goal of recreational activities. I am going to be terrible at this. Probably, Grace agreed cheerfully. That is okay. He shot her a look that might have been annoyed or amused. She was learning he hid his emotions behind carefully neutral expressions. The instructor was an enthusiastic chef named Tony who made jokes and encouraged mistakes. They were making ravioli from scratch, which involved more steps than Grace had anticipated. She found herself shoulder to shoulder with Sebastian at their shared station, their hands dusted with flour, trying to get the pasta dough to the right consistency. This is harder than it looks, Sebastian said, frowning at his dough. Welcome to having a hobby, Grace replied, struggling with her own batch. But then something shifted. Sebastian stopped treating it like a problem to solve and started just doing it. His hands, broad and capable, worked the dough with more confidence. He actually laughed when his first attempt at shaping ravioli fell apart. Okay, that was bad, he admitted. It was terrible, Grace agreed, grinning at the mangled pasta. Try again. By the end of the class, they had produced 2 plates of mostly edible ravioli, and Sebastian looked more relaxed than Grace had ever seen him. "That was actually fun," he said as they walked out into the cool evening. He sounded surprised. "You sound shocked." "I am. I spent 2 hours not thinking about work once." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Thank you. Stop thanking me. You are the one doing the work. But you are the one making me do it." They were standing close enough that Grace could see the exact shade of his eyes, gray with hints of blue, close enough to feel dangerous. She stepped back. "Same time next week. I am thinking we try that new art exhibit downtown." Something flickered across Sebastian's face, but he nodded. "I will clear my calendar." Over the next month, Grace and Sebastian fell into a rhythm. She planned activities, he showed up, and slowly, something began to shift in him. He started mentioning things he noticed during the day, articles he found interesting, restaurants he wanted to try. His responses to her texts got faster and more casual. He smiled more. They went to the art exhibit, where Sebastian surprised her by actually having strong opinions about abstract expressionism. They attended a basketball game, real tickets that Sebastian bought himself, and he taught her the rules when she admitted she had no idea what was happening. They took a day trip to a hiking trail an hour outside the city, and Grace watched him transform in the open air, pointing out birds and plants like he had been storing up observations with no one to share them with. "I used to hike all the time in college," he told her as they stopped at an overlook. The city was visible in the distance, hazy and small. "I forgot how much I loved it." "Why did you stop?" Grace asked. Sebastian was quiet for a moment. "When my father got sick, I took over the company. It was failing, hemorrhaging money and jobs. I did not have time for anything except figuring out how to save it. Then when I finally got it stable, I just never started again. The work became everything." Grace wanted to reach out to touch his arm or his hand to offer comfort. Instead, she said, "Well, you are hiking now." He turned to look at her, and there was something in his expression that made her breath catch. "Yeah, I am." They started having dinner together after their activities, nothing fancy, just whatever restaurant was nearby. Grace told herself it was part of the job, a debrief to discuss how things were going. But she knew she was lying to herself. She was falling for him. It was there in the way her heart jumped when his name appeared on her phone. The way she found herself dressing more carefully on days she knew she would see him. The way she replayed their conversations, holding on to little moments like treasures. Natalie noticed, because of course she did. "You are in trouble," she said one afternoon at her bakery. Grace had stopped by after a particularly good afternoon with Sebastian at a pottery class, where they had both made lopsided bowls and laughed until their stomachs hurt. "I am fine," Grace lied, accepting the coffee Natalie pushed across the counter. "You are falling in love with your client." "I am not, Grace." Grace slumped onto a stool. "Okay, maybe a little, but it does not matter. This is a professional relationship. He hired me to help him have a life. That is all." "Has it occurred to you that maybe you are the life he is trying to have?" Grace shook her head. "He is not interested like that. He is friendly because I work for him. Men do not look at their employees the way he looks at you. You have never even seen us together." "I have seen the way you look when you talk about him. That is enough." Grace left the bakery feeling unsettled. She could not afford to have feelings for Sebastian. He was a client, and more than that, he was a millionaire CEO who existed in a completely different world. This arrangement had an expiration date. Eventually, he would not need her anymore, and that would be that. She needed to be more careful. But being careful became nearly impossible during their next outing. Grace had gotten tickets to an outdoor concert series, a jazz band playing in the park. It was a warm evening in early summer, and the park was full of people on blankets, drinking wine and enjoying the music. Sebastian brought a blanket and a picnic basket. Margaret helped, he admitted when Grace raised her eyebrows, but I picked out the food. They found a spot on the grass, not too close to the stage but with a good view. Sebastian unpacked the basket, revealing cheese, crackers, fruit, and a bottle of wine. "You did good," Grace said, arranging the food between them. "I had a good teacher." The concert started and the music washed over them, smooth and sultry. Grace let herself relax, sipping wine and watching the sun set behind the stage. She was aware of Sebastian beside her, close enough that their shoulders occasionally brushed. Halfway through the concert, it started to rain. Not a downpour, but a steady summer rain that sent people scrambling for cover. Sebastian grabbed the blanket and threw it over both their heads, pulling Grace close. They stood there in their makeshift tent, laughing as rain drummed on the fabric above them. The band played on, because apparently jazz musicians did not mind getting wet. Around them, some people ran for cover while others danced in the rain. "Should we go?" Grace asked, very aware of how close they were, how Sebastian's arm was around her shoulders to hold the blanket in place. "Do you want to?" His voice was low, almost lost in the sound of rain. "No." "Then we stay." They stood there, swaying slightly to the music until the rain softened to a drizzle and the blanket became unnecessary. When Sebastian lowered it, they were still standing close, his arm still around her. He did not move away. Neither did she. "Grace," he said, and there was something in his voice she had never heard before, something uncertain and hopeful and terrified all at once. "Yeah. This is not what I hired you for." Her heart sank. "I know. I am sorry if I know. Let me finish." He turned to face her fully, both hands on her shoulders now. "I hired you to help me have a life, but somewhere along the way you became the life I wanted. Every activity we do, every place we go, it is good because you are there. I do not want to just have experiences. I want to have them with you." Grace's breath caught. "Sebastian, I know this is complicated. I know I am technically your client and there are probably rules about this. But I have been trying to figure out how to tell you for weeks, and I am not going to be good at this, but I have to try. He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "I am falling for you, Grace. Actually, I think I have already fallen." The world seemed to pause. The music, the rain, the other people in the park, all of it faded until there was just Sebastian, looking at her with raw honesty in his eyes. "I fell for you too," Grace whispered. "I have been trying not to, but I fell anyway." Sebastian's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing her cheeks. "Can I kiss you, please?" He kissed her in the rain, soft at first and then deeper, and Grace felt like every moment of the past 2 months had been leading to this. His hands in her hair, her fingers clutching his shirt, the taste of wine and rain and something perfectly them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sebastian rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably fire you." Grace laughed, giddy and breathless. "You probably should." "Consider yourself fired." "Okay. Now you are not my consultant anymore." "Nope. So I can do this." He kissed her again, longer this time, until Grace forgot about professionalism and rules and anything except the feeling of being exactly where she was supposed to be. They left the park holding hands, the picnic basket forgotten until they were halfway to the parking lot and had to go back for it. They could not stop smiling at each other like idiots. "What happens now?" Grace asked as Sebastian drove her home. His hand was on her knee and she had her fingers laced through his. "I have absolutely no idea," he admitted. "I have never been good at relationships. I will probably mess this up." "You will definitely mess it up sometimes, so will I. That is not comforting. It is realistic." Grace squeezed his hand. "We figure it out together. That is how this works." Sebastian pulled up in front of her apartment building and turned off the car. "I do not want a night to end." "It does not have to." His eyebrows rose. "Grace Holloway, are you inviting me upstairs?" She blushed, but held his gaze. "I am." Her apartment looked especially small with Sebastian in it, his broad shoulders and tall frame making the space feel tiny. But he looked around with genuine interest, examining the photos on her walls, the stack of event planning books on her coffee table, the half-finished puzzle on her kitchen counter. "This is very you," he said. "Is that good?" "It is perfect." They ended up on her couch, which was really too small for both of them, so Grace ended up half in Sebastian's lap. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. Sebastian told her about taking over his father's company at 25, terrified he would fail. Grace told him about starting her business with nothing but a laptop and determination. They shared first kiss stories and worst date experiences, and all the small details that people in love want to know about each other. Because that was what this was, Grace realized. Love. Fast and unexpected and absolutely terrifying, but love nonetheless. "I should go," Sebastian said around 2 in the morning, though he made no move to leave. "You need sleep, so do you." "I do not want to leave." "Then stay." He did, and they fell asleep on her too small couch, tangled together, and Grace woke up with a crick in her neck and Sebastian's arm around her waist and felt happier than she could remember being in years. Dating Sebastian was both easier and harder than Grace expected. Easier because they already knew each other, had already built a foundation of friendship and trust. Harder because Sebastian did approach relationships like business problems at first, trying to schedule their time together with the same precision he used for board meetings. "You cannot calendar date night for the third Thursday of every month," Grace said, laughing at the digital invitation he had sent her. "Why not? That way we both know it is protected time." "Because relationships are not that predictable. Sometimes you have a date on Tuesday because you miss each other. Sometimes you cancel plans because you are both too tired and just want to order pizza and watch a movie." Sebastian looked troubled. "That seems inefficient." "It is human." He was learning, though. He started sending her random texts during the day just because. He showed up at her apartment with takeout when she mentioned she was working late. He called her at night just to hear her voice before bed. Grace was learning, too. Sebastian needed directness, not hints. He showed love through actions more than words. He was terrible at relaxing but got better when she was there. He made her coffee exactly the way she liked it, which he had memorized after watching her make it once. They went public with their relationship after a month, which mainly meant telling the people closest to them. Margaret cried actual tears of joy, which embarrassed Sebastian and made Grace laugh. Natalie said she had known all along and demanded to meet him properly. That dinner was terrifying. Natalie owned the best bakery in the city, but she was also fiercely protective of Grace. She grilled Sebastian over appetizers about his intentions and his 5-year plan, and whether he understood how lucky he was. "I do," Sebastian said seriously. "I understand completely. Grace is the best thing that has happened to me." Natalie studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, you pass, but I am watching you." "I would expect nothing less." 3 months into their relationship, Sebastian asked Grace to move in with him. They were at his house, which Grace had been spending more and more time at, and he brought it up casually over breakfast. "You should just live here," he said, not looking up from his coffee. Grace froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. "What? You are here most nights anyway." "Your apartment is too small. This house is too big. It makes sense." Sebastian Brennan, that is possibly the least romantic proposal I have ever heard. He finally looked up, and there was nervousness in his eyes despite his casual tone. "I am not good at this. But I want you here all the time, not just sometimes. I want to wake up with you every morning. I want this to be your home, too." Grace set down her fork. "That is better." "Is that a yes?" "That is a maybe. I need to think about it." She did think about it for 3 days, weighing practical concerns against what her heart wanted. Her lease was up in 2 months. She did love his house. They were together all the time anyway, but more than any of that, she wanted to build a life with him. A real life together. "Okay," she said when she came over for dinner that Friday. "Yes, I will move in." Sebastian's smile could have lit up the city. He picked her up and spun her around, which resulted in them both falling onto the couch, laughing. "Fair warning," Grace said, still breathless. "I have a lot of stuff. I have a lot of space. And I am not giving up my business. I would never ask you to, and we are getting a dog." Sebastian paused. "A dog? This house needs a dog. It is absurd to have a backyard like this without a dog." "I have never had a dog." "Then you are in for a treat." They got a dog 2 weeks after Grace moved in. A rescue mutt named Pepper, who was mostly black lab with some mystery breeds mixed in. Sebastian claimed he was skeptical, but Grace caught him letting Pepper sleep on the bed when he thought she was not looking. Life fell into a new rhythm. Grace ran her business from Sebastian's home office, which was big enough for both of them to work comfortably. They had dinner together most nights, cooking experiments that ranged from delicious to disastrous. Sebastian still worked long hours, but he came home for those dinners. He took weekends off more often than not. He went running with just his thoughts, no phone, and came back looking clearer each time. "You changed my life," he told her one Sunday morning. They were in bed, lazy with sleep, Pepper snoring at their feet. "You changed your own life," Grace countered. "I just pointed you in the right direction." Same thing. Grace's business continued to grow, helped in no small part by word of mouth from Sebastian's connections. She hired an assistant and then another. She moved from small events to larger ones, corporate parties and charity galas, and even a wedding for a local celebrity. She was busier than ever and happier than she had thought possible. They had been together 8 months when Sebastian's father had a heart attack. Not fatal, but serious enough that Sebastian flew to Florida immediately, and Grace went with him. She met his parents in a hospital room, his mother exhausted and relieved, his father pale but cracking jokes from his bed. "So you are the miracle worker," his father said, shaking Grace's hand weakly. "Margaret sends us updates, says you domesticated our son." "Dad," Sebastian protested, but he was smiling. "I am just helping him remember how to live," Grace said diplomatically. "He needed that," his mother said, pulling Grace into a tight hug. "Thank you for loving him." They stayed in Florida for a week while Sebastian's father recovered. Grace saw a different side of Sebastian there, more relaxed, joking with his parents and sharing stories from his childhood. He took her to the beach where he had spent summers as a kid, and they walked along the shore as the sun set. "I want this," Sebastian said suddenly. "The beach. We can come back anytime." "No, I mean yes, but that is not what I meant." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "I want a life with you, not just living together or dating. I want everything. Marriage, kids if you want them, growing old together, all of it." Grace's heart was thundering. "Is this a proposal?" "No, when I propose it will be better than this, I promise. This is just me telling you my intentions, so you know." "I know," Grace said softly. "I want that too." The actual proposal came 2 months later. Sebastian had gotten better at romance, but he still could not help planning. Grace knew something was coming when he insisted on taking her back to the park where they had first kissed. It was fall now, the leaves turning gold and red. He had arranged for the same jazz band to play, just for them, on the same spot where they had stood in the rain. When Grace realized what he had done, tears were already streaming down her face. Sebastian got down on one knee right there on the grass. "Grace Holloway, you reorganized my entire calendar, and then you reorganized my entire life, and I have never been happier. Will you marry me?" The ring was perfect, simple, and elegant. Grace was nodding before he finished talking. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." He slid the ring on her finger and kissed her, and the band played on, and Grace thought about how none of this had been in her plans. She had gone to plan one dinner party, and somehow found everything she had been looking for without knowing she was looking for it. They got married 6 months later in Sebastian's backyard. Now their backyard, with Pepper wearing a flower collar and serving as the unofficial ring bearer. It was small, just family and close friends, exactly what they both wanted. Natalie made the cake. Margaret cried again. Sebastian's vows made Grace cry, heartfelt words about second chances and finding home in another person. Grace's vows talked about how love was not something you could schedule or optimize, but something you had to just show up for every day. "You showed up," she said, holding Sebastian's hands and meaning every word. "You kept showing up, even when it was hard. And I promise to keep showing up for you, every single day, for the rest of our lives." Their honeymoon was 2 weeks in Italy, where they took a real cooking class and made actually good pasta. They hiked through Tuscany and got lost in Venice and spent hours in museums, Sebastian surprising Grace again with his knowledge of art history. "I used to want to be an architect," he admitted in front of the Duomo in Florence, "before business school. You never told me that." "I had not thought about it in years, but being here, seeing all this, it is coming back." "Maybe you should design something," Grace suggested. "Not for work, just for fun." He did, starting to sketch in a notebook he carried everywhere after that. Designs for houses, buildings, fantastical structures that would never be built, but gave him joy to imagine. They came home to real life, to work and responsibilities, and the beautiful mundane routine of loving someone. Grace's business continued to thrive. Sebastian started a mentorship program at his company, taking a more active role in developing young talent instead of just managing from the top. They adopted another dog, a tiny terror named Olive, who somehow became Sebastian's favorite despite his protests. A year after the wedding, Grace found out she was pregnant. They had talked about kids but had not been actively trying, so the positive test was a shock. A good shock, but still a shock. Sebastian stared at the test for a full minute. "We are having a baby." "We are having a baby," Grace confirmed. He whooped, actually whooped, and picked her up and spun her around just like he had when she agreed to move in. Then he immediately set her down carefully, worried he had been too rough. "I am pregnant, not fragile," Grace laughed. "I know," but he stopped, looking overwhelmed. "We are having a baby. You said that already." "I am going to say it a lot. I cannot believe we are having a baby." Pregnancy was hard. Grace had morning sickness that lasted all day, and Sebastian hovered nervously, trying to fix problems that could not be fixed. But he also rubbed her feet without being asked and learned to make ginger tea exactly the way she needed it, and told her she was beautiful even when she felt like a whale. Their daughter was born on a snowy February morning, tiny and perfect and screaming. They named her Sophie Brennan, and Sebastian cried when he held her for the first time, this tough CEO reduced to tears by a 7-pound baby. "She is perfect," he whispered. "Grace, she is perfect." "We made a person," Grace said, exhausted and overwhelmed and more in love with Sebastian than she had thought possible. "We are going to mess this up sometimes," he said, echoing her words from years ago. "Definitely. But we will figure it out together." Sophie was 3 months old when Sebastian came home from work early, something he had gotten better about since becoming a father. He found Grace in the nursery, rocking a sleeping Sophie and looking exhausted. "Rough day?" he asked quietly, taking the baby so Grace could stretch. "She only naps if I am holding her. I love her desperately, but I have not showered in 2 days." Sebastian carried Sophie to her crib, laying her down with the practiced care of a new father. Miraculously, she stayed asleep. Then he took Grace's hand and led her to their bathroom. "Go shower." "Take your time, I have got her. But you just got home from work." "And now I am home with my family, which is exactly where I want to be." Grace showered, actually taking her time for once, and when she came out, she found Sebastian in the rocking chair with Sophie on his chest, reading to her from a picture book even though she was too young to understand. This was her life now, Grace thought. This beautiful, chaotic, unexpected life. She had gone to plan one dinner party and ended up with everything. Sophie grew into a toddler who had her father's gray eyes and her mother's determination. They had family dinners every night that Sebastian was home. They took trips to the Science Museum, where Sebastian pointed out exhibits with the same enthusiasm he had shown on that first documentary. They hosted dinner parties, Grace finally getting to plan them for fun rather than work, though she always insisted on hiring the catering herself. Margaret came out of retirement briefly to meet Sophie, declared her perfect, and told Sebastian and Grace she was proud of them. "You both bloomed," she said. "Exactly like I hoped." When Sophie was 2, they talked about having another baby. Sebastian admitted he was terrified of being outnumbered, but also could not imagine their family without one more. Grace felt the same pull toward a second child, wanting Sophie to have a sibling. Their son, Samuel, was born on a bright summer day, easygoing where his sister had been fussy. Sebastian took paternity leave, something he would never have considered before Grace, and spent 6 weeks at home learning to juggle 2 kids. "This is insane," he said one afternoon, bouncing Samuel while helping Sophie build a block tower. "Why did we think this was a good idea?" "Because we are gluttons for punishment," Grace suggested, cleaning up the disaster that was their living room. But she would not trade it for anything, and she knew Sebastian felt the same. He had been terrified of failing at relationships, of being unable to balance life and work, of missing the important things. Now he coached Sophie's soccer team and changed diapers without complaint, and could quote entire picture books from memory. Years passed in the beautiful blur of raising children and building careers and choosing each other every single day. Grace's business became one of the most successful event planning companies in the city. Sebastian's company thrived, known as much for its culture as its profits. Their kids grew, Sophie into a confident 7-year-old and Samuel into a curious 5-year-old. They were at their park, on a fall afternoon when Sebastian pulled Grace close. The kids were playing with Pepper and Olive, who were now senior dogs but still game for fetch. "Do you remember when I hired you to plan one dinner?" Sebastian asked. "How could I forget? Best job I ever took. I thought I needed help creating a social calendar. Turns out I needed help creating a life worth living." Grace leaned into him, watching their children play. "You did that yourself. We did it together." And that was the truth of it. Grace had walked into Sebastian's house that first day with a plan for a single dinner party, and no idea that she was about to reorganize everything, not just his calendar but his entire existence. And her own in the process. She had fallen in love with a millionaire who had forgotten how to be a person, and he had fallen in love with her, and together they had built something neither of them had planned for but both of them needed. It was not always easy. They still fought sometimes, still struggled with balance, still had moments of doubt and frustration. But they showed up for each other every single day just like Grace had promised in her vows. "I love you," Sebastian said, kissing the top of her head. "I love you too." Sophie ran over, demanding they push her on the swings. Samuel wanted to show them a bug he had found. The dogs barked at a squirrel. It was chaos and noise and absolutely perfect. Grace had learned early in her career that the best events were not the ones that went exactly according to plan, but the ones where people felt something real, where connections were made and memories were created, and life happened in all its messy, beautiful glory. Her life with Sebastian was exactly that. Not perfect, not always easy, but real and beautiful and so full of love that sometimes she had to stop and catch her breath from the joy of it. She had reorganized his calendar that first night, slotting in dinner parties and social obligations. But what she had really done was help him make room for love, for family, for all the things that made life worth living. And he had done the same for her, giving her a home and a family and a love story she had not even known she was looking for. Years later, when Sophie asked how they met, Grace and Sebastian would look at each other and smile. "I hired your mother to plan a dinner party," Sebastian would say, "and I ended up replanning his whole life," Grace would add. "Best decision I ever made," Sebastian would finish, pulling Grace close. And it was. The best decision either of them had ever made was choosing each other, every single day, building a life that was messy and chaotic and full of dogs and kids and love. Grace had walked into that first meeting thinking she was taking on a simple job. Instead, she had found her future, her family, her home. She had found Sebastian, and he had found her, and together they had created something neither of them could have planned for but both of them needed. They grew old together, exactly as Sebastian had promised on that beach in Florida. They watched their kids graduate and go to college and start their own lives. They traveled and laughed and held each other through hard times and good ones. They celebrated anniversaries and milestones and all the small, ordinary moments that made up a life. And every year, on the anniversary of their first kiss, they went back to that park. Sometimes it rained and they would stand in it, remembering. Sometimes it was clear, and they would lie on a blanket and look at the stars. But they always went, always remembered, always chose each other all over again. Because Grace had not just reorganized Sebastian's calendar that day. She had reorganized his heart, made room in it for love and joy and all the beautiful chaos of a life fully lived. And he had done the same for her. That was the real story. Not millionaire hires event planner, though that was true. Not woman redesigns man's calendar, though that happened too. The real story was two people finding each other against the odds, choosing each other despite the obstacles, and building a life that was better than anything either of them could have imagined. The real story was love, in all its messy, beautiful, unexpected glory, and it was perfect.